Have you ever wondered how different religions interpret the same text differently? Today we'll explore one such example, Isaiah 53, a chapter from the Hebrew Bible. This chapter holds significant interpretations across various religious traditions. In Christianity, it's often seen as a prophecy pointing to Jesus Christ, a divine figure who suffers for the sins of humanity. But in Jewish tradition, the interpretation of Isaiah 53 takes a different turn. Here, the focus isn't on a single divine figure, but rather, it's about the collective suffering of the Jewish people. It's a reflection of the hardships endured by the Jewish nation, represented by the servant in the text. So the same chapter, the same words, yet different meanings. Fascinating, isn't it? Join us as we delve deep into the Jewish interpretation of Isaiah 53, a chapter of profound suffering and hope. Understanding the original Hebrew words in Isaiah 53 is crucial for interpretation. The chapter describes a servant who suffers, but the Hebrew text makes it clear that this servant is not a divine figure but a representation of the Jewish people. Let's delve into some key Hebrew terms used in this chapter. Our first term is abud, or eved. This word is often translated as servant. In the context of Isaiah 53, Jewish scholars interpret eved as referring to the nation of Israel, which is frequently called God's servant throughout the Hebrew Bible. For example, in Isaiah 41 verse 8, we find the verse, "But you, Israel, my servant Jacob, whom I have chosen." Next we have negsh, or nigash. This term means oppressed or afflicted, emphasizing the hardships endured by the servant. This term resonates deeply with the Jewish interpretation of Isaiah 53 as the Jewish people, throughout history, have been oppressed by various nations. Finally, let's look at cholel, or kolal, often translated as pierced or wounded. This term in Hebrew can also mean profaned or defiled. It's not just about physical piercing or wounding. It points to the suffering and humiliation experienced by the Jewish people, reflecting the profound disrespect and violation they've faced over the centuries. These terms help us to understand the Jewish interpretation of Isaiah 53. It's not about an individual messianic figure, but the collective suffering of the Jewish people. The nation of Israel, referred to as the servant, has endured persecution and suffering throughout history, and this chapter is seen as a reflection of that experience. So in the original Hebrew, Isaiah 53 tells a story of suffering and endurance, a story that resonates deeply with the Jewish people. It's a tale of a servant, representing the nation of Israel, who is oppressed and profaned, yet remains steadfast in the face of adversity. It's a narrative that has been lived out by the Jewish people time and time again throughout history. These Hebrew terms paint a picture of suffering and endurance, a story that resonates deeply with the Jewish people. In Jewish interpretation, Isaiah 53 speaks not of an individual messianic figure, but of the collective suffering of the Jewish people. This chapter in the Hebrew Bible has been a source of much debate and discussion. The Jewish understanding, however, is clear. The servant depicted here is not a divine individual, but rather a collective representation of the Jewish people. Isaiah 53 paints a picture of a servant, enduring suffering and affliction. In the Jewish tradition, this servant is seen as a mirror, reflecting the collective experience of the Jewish people throughout history. The Jewish people have faced numerous trials and tribulations, from exile to persecution. It's this shared experience of suffering that Isaiah 53 encapsulates. Let's take a closer look. The Hebrew term eved, often translated as servant, is seen by Jewish scholars as a reference to the nation of Israel. This interpretation is supported by other instances in the Hebrew Bible, where Israel is referred to as God's servant, such as in Isaiah 41:8. The Hebrew term nigash, meaning oppressed or afflicted, is also key in understanding this chapter. It underscores the hardships that the Jewish people have endured at the hands of various nations throughout history. Another term of significance is kolal, often translated as pierced or wounded. In Hebrew, this term can also mean profaned or defiled. It points to the suffering and humiliation experienced by the Jewish people rather than a physical piercing. These terms, woven together in the tapestry of Isaiah 53, present a narrative of shared suffering, of a nation bearing the weight of affliction. It's a narrative that resonates with the Jewish people's historical experiences. This collective interpretation of suffering also offers a perspective on the redemptive quality of suffering. The Jewish people have often been misunderstood as being punished by God for their own sins. In contrast, Jewish tradition sees their suffering as having a redemptive quality, allowing them to bear the sins and pain of the world. The servant in Isaiah 53, then, is not a divine figure, but the nation of Israel enduring hardship. Let's now consider key verses in Isaiah 53 and their Jewish interpretation. Starting with Isaiah 53:3, the Hebrew text is, "Nevazeh v'chadel ishi mish mikuvot v'yadua chali v'kemestar panim mimeno nivazeh v'lo chashavnu." In English it translates to, "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised and we esteemed him not." The Jewish interpretation sees the he as a symbolic representation of Israel as a collective. The Jewish people have been despised and rejected many times throughout history, and this verse reflects that reality. Next we have Isaiah 53:4. The original Hebrew reads, "Achen chalinuhu nesha umekovinu savlam, vanach chashavnuhu negua makail him umaneh." This translates to, "Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted." The Jewish interpretation suggests that the Jewish people have borne the pain and suffering of the world, often misunderstood as divine punishment for their own sins. In reality, their suffering has a profound redemptive purpose. Finally, let's look at Isaiah 53:7. "Negesh v'unana v'lo yiftach piu kshalet tevach yubel, v'kracha lifnei gzaziane elama, v'lo yiftach piuv." This translates to, "He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth." The Jewish interpretation sees this as a testament to Israel's quiet endurance in the face of immense hardship. Despite their suffering, the Jewish people have maintained their faith and commitment to God, often bearing their trials in silence. Through these verses, we see a poignant portrait of the Jewish people's suffering and resilience. So, what's the message of Isaiah 53 according to Jewish interpretation? Well, it's a powerful narrative about the collective suffering of the Jewish people throughout history. The Hebrew terms such as Eved, Nigash, and Kolal all point to a deeply poignant tale of a servant representing the nation of Israel, enduring hardship and humiliation. The verses we explored, like Isaiah 53:3, 53:4, and 53:7, all highlight the unjust suffering of Israel, often misunderstood as divine punishment. Yet, the Jewish interpretation offers a different perspective. This suffering has a redemptive quality, a testament to the enduring faith and resilience of the Jewish people. Through the lens of Jewish tradition, Isaiah 53 paints a picture of a nation that, despite being oppressed and afflicted, remains steadfast in faith, often enduring in silence like a lamb led to the slaughter. In the face of suffering, the Jewish people have shown incredible resilience and faith, a truth powerfully reflected in Isaiah 53.